Greetings, Gilliam the Rogue here once again. Today we're going to be talking about the part 2 of the Morrowind PTS changes and patch notes. All of this content that I will be discussing is not under NDA. They have lifted this portion again. I talked a little bit about it in the previous video. We will not be talking about Warden, we will not be talking about Trials, and we will not be talking about Battlegrounds. Those things are under NDA. For the most part, there are a few things, but I'm not going to be talking about those because those are experiences you should figure for yourself. But in today's video, we're going to be talking about the more positive impacts that these changes bring along with us. And a lot of them might seem negative, but we're going to try and change that point of view a little bit and see the good that's going to come from it, because not everything is about necessarily being wholly good or wholly bad. There's two sides of a coin. There's multiple sides of an argument. You've heard these metaphors, but they apply here too. So the first thing is the champion point rebalance system. This is a lot of great stuff in here, and it's a good step forward in terms of bringing champion points where they need to be. The system was put in place to allow the player to have character progression past level cap. Many MMOs do this, and for very good reason, because when you hit level cap, a lot of content seems to die or have less purpose, because it's like, what's the point of playing anymore if I'm already at my peak? And that's ignoring gear grinds and all that stuff, but everyone likes progression to a system where it's like you always have something to achieve. So that's what champion points are there for. It does its job, but it could be better. And the patch and these changes try to address some of the power creep advantages that they give us and help out both the end game player and the new game player. So the first major change with champion point system was diminishing returns. Now this might be a foreign concept for many people, as Elder Scrolls Online does not have a form of diminishing returns at the moment outside of cost reduction. It used to, in a sense, with release, where it had this system called soft caps or overcharging stats, but that has been removed. There are no caps whatsoever for the most part. There are a few hard caps, but they're not really attainable. What diminishing returns do is the more you invest in a stat, or in this case a node in the champion point system, the less effective that each point you spend becomes. So for example, let's open up the PTS and go to the champion point system. Before, many of these nodes went up to 25% or 16%. Now, a lot of them have been rechanged into tiers. We talked about this. Now there's the 15%, the 25%, and the 35%. And based on what stat they dealt with, it fell into one of those tiers. So if it was a really big tier that covered a lot of things like flat damage done or reduced, it was the lowest tier, 15%, because it covers everything. So you want a holistic system to be slightly weaker. Then as we get more niche with things like damage over time or something of the sort, it went to 25%, because that bonus didn't apply to everything that we had, but rather a smaller pool. But when you specialize in that, you don't want to feel like you're losing out, so you want to disperse your points, and that's why it goes up to 25%. And then there's a 35% tier, and this refers to a very, very small portion of the game, and it's usually dealing with light and heavy attacks. There are a few others, but since light and heavy attacks are only one small part of the massive puzzle or pieces that we have at our disposal, that's why it goes up to 35%. So those are the three new tiers. This is great because it incentivizes spreading your points elsewhere instead of just dumping everything into whatever mathematically makes the most sense. Now we're going to have to look at a much wider system and see, okay, what abilities are we using our direct damage? What percent of that direct damage applies to our overall DPS, and in turn, what percent amp would be most beneficial. So this is going to change theory crafting. It's going to change a lot of the programs that many of us run, like Sarah and myself. So this is cool. It's nice. It adds some diversity, and it makes characters feel more unique, because if your build deals with dots, well, then you're going to want to sprint differently. But if your class deals with direct damage or AoE, then you're going to sprint differently. So really like these changes. And furthermore, a lot of really good new things came with it. So there was the removal of cost reduction, and we talked about this. It seems bad for the most part. In PvE, it is bad kind of no matter how you look at it. There's nothing we gained out of it. It wasn't done for a greater good sort of thing. But in PvP, it was definitely needed to take away from the potency of heavy armor builds. So it was a good change overall in some regards. Now, we've introduced something called Siphoner. I wouldn't call this a good or bad change. All it does is when you deal light or heavy attack damage, you reduce the enemy's health, magicka, and stamina recovery by up to 15% for 3 seconds. So if you're constantly weaving on an enemy in PvP, then you're going to reduce their resource management in terms of recovery by 15%. This is kind of nice, but ultimately not many people are going to take it because 15% isn't a lot. So, and this assumes that you're going to be able to constantly weave. So that's only single target because you can only light attack one target at a time. If you're light attacking off global cooldown, that means you can have up to 3 people affected by this at once, assuming you're able to hit them all within 1 second of each other. But it doesn't really do that much, so I wouldn't call it good or bad. It's kind of a fluff stat. It'll be more in the favor of Zergs, unfortunately, because the more numbers you have in a larger group, the more ability you are able to diversify yourself or have niche roles and applications. So there could be someone in your group who does nothing but tries to make resource management for their enemies harder, runs cost poisons, runs Siphoner, all these crazy things that just retracts from your enemy's cost and stuff. They could do that. But a smaller group couldn't do that because they have to make sure that they're at a baseline of strength. They're not able to have so many parts of a system where they can just have one person say, oh, don't worry, I'll do less damage because I have 5 other people doing damage for me. No, in a smaller group, they're not able to access those things because everyone has to meet like this baseline of, I need this amount of health recovery, I need this amount of damage, I need this amount of sustain. So ultimately, Siphoner is going to be more on the bad side of things because it's going to play into that, allowing larger groups to just use numbers to their advantage. But, meh, it's kind of whatever. Next change, we have Tumbling is now split into 2. Before, this used to be cost reduction of Rajdol, of Dodge Roll, and Break Free. Now it's only 1. So this is going to take away from some of that insane resource management of our stamina bars in PvP. So healers aren't going to just be able to break free and then dodge roll right away. They're going to have to think twice about spending resources. This also hurts those really obnoxious stamina builds that just seem to dodge roll into infinity and beyond right after CC breaking. So this is going to retract from that. It's going to force them to spend between 2 points instead of 1. So overall, good change. Furthermore, since tanks lost the ability to have cost reduction, that means that they're just going to go 100 into Shadow Ward, so you can kind of call it a good change because they're going to get some of that resource management back in the form of reducing the cost of block. Furthermore, this will be enforced by the change of block going from having a cooldown of 0.5 to 0.25 seconds. This means in the past, every time an enemy hit you, if they hit you in 0.5 second intervals, they would drain stamina. But let's say I had 3 enemies, and I had 3 enemies hit me all within 0.5 seconds. I would only be charged for 1. But if I had 3 enemies hit me, and 1 hits me at 1 second and 1 hits me at 0.5, well, that'll be 2 costs, but not 4. This is going to change to every 0.25 seconds, so it will effectively double the amount of resource drain. But the thing is how many times are you going to be attacked in these tiny windows? 0.25 seconds is extremely fast, and the only really big place this is going to affect us is in PvP when we are outnumbered by massive groups just being beat on. So the permablock aspect will not be as apparent in PvP with being outnumbered. Now, this is good and bad because smaller groups get hurt by larger groups, but at the same time, you should not be able to sit in a group of 40 people and survive because you can hold block. That's kind of stupid. So, taking away from that power. And then in PvE, it'll just hurt a little bit in terms of you're tanking lots and lots of trash, because there's just going to be so many things hitting you that your stam will be dropping. But the nice thing is it's trash. It's going to die really quickly, so it's not the end of the world. So we can kind of chalk up the green tree as more of a positive change than a negative in PvP, and kind of flatlining at a gray area in PvE. Now we're on to the blue tree, and this is where most of the good happens. The diminishing returns mean that we're not going to want to stack into one thing, so that means diversity in CP allocation. So that's great. Having different builds have different strengths is phenomenal. It's why the CP system does its job really well, in my opinion, when it's able to do that. So Elemental Defender or Expert used to go up to 25%, now goes up to 15%. Furthermore, because of diminishing returns, if we look at 50 points into Elemental Expert, it's at 11.25%. So if we spend another 50 points in here, instead of gaining 11.25%, we're only going to gain 3.75%. The value, the diminishing returns, reach a point where it's like, alright, I'm kind of getting to the point where spending in this is wasting CP. I have a precious amount that I can spend. I would be better off spending it elsewhere. So let's say I spend the 50 points into Spell Erosion. Spell Erosion increases my spell penetration by 3960. Now in terms of PvE damage, we just take this and divide it by 500 because mobs have 500 points of resistance for everything, and we get roughly 8% damage. This will change based on the potency of the attack. It's not an end-all be-all, but we see it's much more efficient to spend our points here. Or if we go into Elfborn, we're going to get 18.75% increased damage with crit heals of magic abilities or damage. So, much more efficient, great for diversity, allows for spreading out of points. Furthermore, we introduced a new thing called Physical Weapon Expert, which compounds all of the light and heavy attack of physical damage abilities, so like bows, daggers, swords, dual wielding, two-hand. Everything has been put into one, so I spend points here, and I get up to 35% increased damage with light and heavy attacks of stamina-based weapons. Fantastic, because diminishing returns don't really start hitting us hard, because we're at 26.25%. We almost have another 10%. It's going to be 8.75% from spending those 50 points. So the diminishing returns don't hit as hard on the 35% tiers, and it just means that, hey, I can spend some 10-20 points in here and get a massive boost to light and heavy attacks. And if you're weaving, that's a lot of your DPS. So overall, we get a little bit of a DPS boost from this. Then we also got Master at Arms, which is kind of the counter of Thaumaturge. Before we just had Mighty and Thaum. Mighty increased flat damage, Elemental Expert if you're Magicka, and then Thaumaturge affected all damage over time effects up to 25%. This remains unchanged, however diminishing returns start hitting it sooner, but everyone could make use out of this. But this incentivized builds that only use dots, so things like Templars, their spammable is considered a dot. Stamina builds using Rapid Strikes, enforcing the Maelstrom build. It was all about dots. So only having access to Thaumaturge further played into this fact that we only have one sort of build applicable to endgame meta. Now that changes a little bit because Master of Arm comes up with direct damage attacks going up to 25%. So initial hit attacks that hit one time in a 1 second interval. So they don't have a duration associated with them. They deal one source of damage. Now this can apply to AoEs as well, as long as it doesn't deal multiple ticks of damage in an interval. So things like Blade Cloak. This is considered a damage over time because it deals multiple sources of damage over a duration. However, there are things like Steel Tornado, which hit once in that 1 second duration, so there is no damage over time. This would be affected by Master at Arms, meaning we're going to play into a more diverse sort of gameplay where it's like, alright, well, I don't have Maelstrom Daggers, I'm stuck with Surprise Attack as a Nightblade. Well, I'm losing a lot of DPS in live servers because I don't have a CP node that makes everything I do 25% stronger. Now that changes. Now I actually gain DPS because Surprise Attack is in a direct damage ability. Now it gets a free 25% scaling from CP if we devote enough points to it. So this incentivizes different builds to have different strengths, and that's great because there are a lot of different builds out there dealing with either light and heavy attacks, using damage over time, using AoE, using single hit damage. So now we have those options to either go into a light and heavy attack build, a direct damage build, or a damage over time build. So This helps PvE have diversity, and it helps PvP have diversity. Now, the main issue in PvP is that it just gives us a bunch of free damage, because dots are pretty shitty in PvP at the moment because purges exist. At the moment, Templars, as well as anyone with access to the Cyrodiil support skill Purge, are able to infinitely remove all negative effects associated with them. Granted, Purge is quite expensive, but the Templar Purge, or Purify, is much less expensive. There's a cost reduced version of this. I have no innate cost reduction because I'm not wearing light armor. So, yes, you have to give up a global, you have to spend magicka, but there's no disincentive to just spam removing negative defects or negative debuffs from me. So damage over time has always been kind of shoddy. So like Stam DKs have a really hard time pressuring a Templar healer because they just purge their Noxious Breath, purge their Venom Claw, purge whatever dot they have on them. So you need burst damage, so that just plays more into the meta of PvP of only having burst damage builds being effective. So Master at Arms is just going to play into that. It's going to make gank builds a little bit stronger because, yes, they lost that 25% bonus crit hit damage against players from stealth, but guess what? If they go 100 points into Master at Arms, they get it right back. So it didn't really change anything. Gank builds and super high burst damage builds in Cyrodiil are still going to be the meta, and the CP system enforces into it. Just another reason to only play Azurus. Now going into the red tree. More good came from this as well, because it did the same thing that the blue tree did, where it allows us to reduce damage taken by multiple sources. And this helps equalize PvP, because there's a check and balance, because, oh, you want to go 25% into Master at Arms, now I'm going to go 25% into Ironclad and nullify that CP node. So, that's great. That helps allow for checks and balances, counters to everything, an advantage that the blue tree gives. So, that's fantastic. I really like this. But at the same time, in PvP, it's going to be harder to do this because you have to spread your red CP out a little bit more than your blue CP, because you take a lot more sources of damage than you deal damage. Because a build that you make deals damage based on what you want to have it dealing with, but every build takes a lot of different sources of damage that are dependent on who you're fighting, and you can't really control who you're fighting, so we don't have as much freedom with spending our points. Still, checks and balances, always good. But this helps PvE the most, actually, because while we did lose a 10% flat damage reduction from Hardy and Elemental Defender, we now gain 25% free damage reduction from Ironclad, and then 25% from Thick Skinned. The really nice thing about this is that we pretty much reached the same exact place that we used to with Hardy and Elemental Defender, because PvE only has direct damage or damage over time. So we have an exact counter to Hardy and Elemental Defender in terms of, oh, well, that was the old 25%, 25%. Now we get the same fucking thing. Furthermore, in PvE, most damage is direct damage, so I don't really have much of an incentive to go 100 points into Thick Skin, so I can take this down. Let's get some 10%. That's a really good thing. 22 points for 10%. Now I can start spending points into Hardy and Elemental Defender and get even more damage reduction. Now I have almost another 10%, 10%, 25%. I now have 35% damage reduction against all PvE attacks, and then another 35% or even more, 45% against AoE or damage over time in PvE. So PvE has really reduced the amount of burst damage we can take by implementing these great CP changes. Fucking good job, ZeniMax. This has been one of the worst things plaguing PvE in a long time, is just taking so much damage out of nowhere because mechanics line up and you get one shot. Giving us options to tone down that burst and allow us to survive is a step in the right direction. It doesn't fix anything because you're still going to have moments of insane bursts where you're just going to die, and it doesn't allow us to learn anything from it. It doesn't teach us, oh, hey, you died because 50 mechanics happened. Well, I can't really learn how to get around 50 mechanics happening because a lot of those are based on RNG. So it's not really a progression-based system. It's more of just, oh, hey, here's this really toxic bug in our game at the moment. We have no answer for it in terms of fixing the bug, but here's a way to alleviate some of its issues. So, again, a step in the right direction, but you still have a lot of work to do in terms of PvE burst and the toxicity of just not being able to learn because you just had too many bad things happen at once that you can't control. So, CP changes overall, pretty fucking great, in my opinion. I mean, losing cost reduction sucks in PvE, but it does more good than bad in terms of PvP. And a lot of great diversity has come from that. So, good job with CP. I'm looking forward to seeing what more can be done, because there is still a lot of work to be done. Next, there's this new thing called skill line unlocking. I wouldn't call this good or bad. MMOs and video games in general really can drive off of that feeling of mystique, that wonderment, that bewilderment of just being confused. You're dropped into a game, you're like, what's going on? There's so many things to learn. So kind of adding the hidden skill lines of the game makes it kind of have that source of mystery. Like, you put on a sword, oh, I just unlocked a dual wield because I put 2 swords on, or I put on a shield and it gives me sword and board and I kill an enemy with it. That adds into that sense, but at the same time, since there are so few sources of information in the game built in, ignoring content creators and players themselves, it's really hard for someone to learn anything and have this reliable source of information to turn to and be like, well, I'm confused. I want to become a mage, but how do I unlock, what skills do I have at my disposal? How do I start making my build before I start progressing too late and spend my points and like get something that I don't want? Yes, we can reallocate skill points and stuff, so there is always that option, but at the same time, when you're going into a game, you kind of want to be able to make something or have an idea of what you want to do. And hiding skill lines kind of takes away from that. It makes that more difficult to do. Now, if you streamline this information, and when we're making a character, and let's say an NPC like the Prophet says, he hints at killing an enemy with a certain weapon will allow us to learn new techniques with it. If you implement a good system that tells players and gives them information, hey, there's hidden stuff in this game if you tinker around with it, great, because then that kind of alleviates that problem, and it allows the players to experiment and have that sense of bewilderment. So, good if you incentivize on it properly and do the right things. Adjusting experience from level 1 to 50. Again, a system that's a gray area for me because it's not going to be done correctly. I really like leveling systems in MMOs that have sort of a learning curve to them. I don't want to drop into a game and be able to level from 1 to level cap within an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, which you can currently do with Skyreach and many grinds. But the main issue with this is that you don't learn anything. And while I might not have something to learn, and many others, because we've made so many characters and put so many hours into the game, a new player coming in is like, hey, I want to get to level endgame so I can play with my friends. And they're like, alright, go grind Skyreach. I'll take you through. It'll be 3 hours. Well, a new player gets to level 50, starts gaining CP, tries to go into a dungeon, and dies. Because he has no clue what he's doing. He didn't learn anything from grinding other than maybe how to keep up with his friend and not die because 500 things were hitting him. He didn't learn mechanics. He didn't learn how to make a new build. He's being told information and he doesn't have the ability to learn. So if you increase the amount of experience required, you also must look for ways to teach players how to play your game, because currently Elder Scrolls Online does literally nothing to teach you how to play the game. There are confusing tooltips that make no sense, nothing lines up, you don't, I look at surprise attack, I deal 5592 physical damage, okay, what does that mean? Where does that number come from? I have no information at my disposal. I look at stamina or magicka. Affects how many magic abilities you can cast. Okay, that makes sense. And how effective those abilities will be. Well, what does that mean? Is there a coefficient for magicka abilities? Does it change? That doesn't give me information. Furthermore, then we have another contradictory piece. Stave weapon damage. And weapon is capitalized, insinuating that this is a an important noun. So this was referring to maybe our weapon damage stat, because this has capital letters. And it says stave weapon damage is based on your max magicka. So for me as a new player, that means if I have a bunch of max magicka, I'm going to have a bunch of spell damage? Is that how it works? No, that's not how it works. But I'm looking at this tooltip and that's what it's telling me. So increasing the amount of XP, while that seems like a very menial thing that doesn't really change much about a game, at the same time for a new player coming in to learn the game, if you are going to have a long leveling system, you have to have a lot of good information and implement it at key moments when a player is learning your game so that they can go into the game and actually fucking play it, instead of the nonsense we have now where we have a ton of people at CP cap, but half of them don't know how to play the game properly. So increasing XP requirement doesn't make much sense unless you are going to add a system that teaches players more so that you can actually make some difference out of this. So another gray area. It has to have the right things done. Blah, 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 blah. Serial updates. This is really nice because now we're going to start getting a lot of old sets. That's great because before it was really hard. We couldn't get these sets in certain traits. We couldn't get them in styles. We couldn't get them in like jewelry was set to blue or purple. So adding these gives the option to maybe come in gold. That would be cool. We'll see more of these sets available to us. More diversity. Fantastic. ESO plus double bank space, great, incentivize people to pay money to your game. I still would like more reason other than just fluff stuff. Like this is nice, but what am I going to do with this? Just put another 140 items of garbage in my bank, or 240 items of garbage? Like I kind of want more incentive, or like a new player, oh, 480 bank spots. What do I do with that? I have 100 right now. So this doesn't incentivize a new person to become an ESO Plus member unless they've been playing the game for a long time. But that's not your target audience at the moment, because a lot of people that you could stand to make money off of, you already are. So this doesn't do anything. Additional character slots, whatever. This new inverse kinematic system, it's cool. It looks nice. If we look here, it just makes you follow your terrain. It looks more natural. So instead of just like having this rigid body when I walk upstairs, my knees sort of change elevation. So I kind of like hover or stick to my environment, and my legs will change based on that. So like if I kind of put up a pedestal, my ankle will bend, or I'll put like one knee up over the other. So cool. Doesn't do anything really for the game. Just more immersion. Blah, blah, blah. Buff tracking. Good job with this one. Thank you so much for allowing players to have information at their disposal. Now, it's not perfect. So, previously, with other add-ons on PC, these buff icons looked completely different. Now they're new, and there's no way of telling what the fuck I have running when I have 53 things happening at once. Like, these are all new buffs except maybe these two. So, the Blade Cloak is the same, Twin Fang is the same, but everything else is different. And there's not really much of a way for me to go learn that other than hopping into my character page and trying to memorize. So maybe use the icon themselves of the ability you casted, or have like a lore book that we have access to, or like a journal that we can flip through and have a picture of whatever icon that is associated with what buff. Major Berserk, maybe it's a very angry guy because he's Berserk, he's going to do increased damage. But have that information available to us, because buff systems in their current state, unless you're going to go into combat, apply everything, and then quick open your book and look, okay, what ability did this? What is that one? Got to memorize. Major Ward Resolve, look like a cloak, whatever. Like, that doesn't help anyone except people who have absurd amount of time, and that, I mean, whatever. So, buff system could be better. Blah, blah, blah. Battlegrounds, not talking about that. Let's go down to some of the other stuff. There was one change, reinforced. Let me try and find that. Where is reinforced? Here it is. This was a little hidden buff. Any set Any item set that had a 2, 3, or 4-piece bonus that granted either spell resistance or physical resistance has had that value increased by 35%. Great job. It's not necessarily hard to reach armor cap, which means spell and physical resistance cap in the game, but adding ways to have an easier source of these and not have it be like, oh, I have this really cool 5-piece set, but it's 2 to 4 pieces all physical and spell resistance. I don't want it anymore. Incentivizing that and making it easier and having these stats bring more to the table is great, because that opens up a lot of diversity in towards of old gear sets that had these bonuses were really gross. Like, it was like, yeah, I don't want this. I'd rather just have max health, because CP gives me damage reduction, which further enforces the potency of max health. Now, by giving this buff to these, it kind of gives them more reason to be ran. So, a little nice hidden thing that was put in there. Other big changes, for the most part, this resource per level thing, like the new adrenaline rush for Redguard and stuff, and helping hands for Dragon Knights, this isn't necessarily a bad system in its core. Like, trying to equalize the amount of resource return or efficiency you gain out of something based on level so that you can balance this is not an inherently busted idea, because we talked about it in the previous video, where the more and more resources we get, the more warped or efficient to the point of just imbalance it gets, where we have percent resource things. So like 2 years from now, when CP cap is 1 billion or whatever, and I have 8 million stamina, if I have 20% of my stamina back from hitting shards, that's going to be really, really busted. So taking away from percent things kind of allows stats to retain an importance as we progress in level. So weapon damage will always be decent. Stamina will always be decent. Instead of, eventually, if we have this system that goes off percent resources, eventually stamina will reach such a high amount that its importance will override other stats, and it'll be like, why would I ever take weapon damage when stamina gives me all of this resource management, still gives me damage, and so on. So the system that you guys put in place isn't a terrible idea. Yeah, it kind of hurts being able to stack stamina and feel rewarded for it, but at the same time, it's playing into the future. You know that there's going to be issues with it, so good job catching it, but the values that you've put on these are too low. Everyone feels like on top of everything that's happened, losing cost reduction, armor passives getting nerfed, abilities costing more. With all of this happening at once, having these very small pools based on max resource hurt us so much, and it hurts the average player too, because a lot of the baselines, like if you have less than 19k stamina, this will be a buff. Who the fuck has less than 19k stamina as like a Redguard? Like, you can be buck naked with CP spent and have like 28k stam. Like, it doesn't make any sense. So if you increase those values, more good will come out of it, and it doesn't have to be a bad system. Yeah, it'll suck, but at the same time, it'll make things easier to balance, it'll make sure stats always remain important as we get progression, and it allows newer players to come in and not feel like they're at such a disadvantage because they don't have CP giving them butt tons of resources. So it's a good idea, but you need to do it right. You need to reevaluate the values that you put on them. Helping Hands, yeah, maybe it shouldn't give me 5% of my stamina back whenever I cast an ability, but maybe it should be roughly equal to 5% if I had, say, 26k stamina, because a tank is going to have anywhere between 20 to 25k stam, while a DPS is going to have somewhere from 30 to 40k stam. So if you take averages of those and you kind of reach this halfway point where DPS don't lose too much because they have more stam, and tanks don't gain too much because they have too little stam, well, then that helps, and it incentivizes your glorious hybrid builds or whatever you want to do with them, because it allows people who don't have as much stamina because they're either a healer or whatever to still have a reason. Oh, shit, I need stamina in PvP, but I'm a DK healer, for whatever reason you do that. I need stamina back, I can cast this ability and get a little bit more than I used to be out of it and have a reason to actually utilize that passive more than just having like this tiny little fluff. So you need to do it right. Other big things in terms of positive changes I can't really comment on because there's so much. I guess I could talk a little bit about item sets. Let me just look through this, see if I've missed anything important. We did nerf some of the old sets that were a bit overpowered. So like Bone Pirate was like you gained a butt ton of stamina, health, and so on or whatever from the, you got a bunch of stamina and regen. So nerfing the regen to 150, a little too much, maybe make it like 175 or something, but good. You realize that these resource changes required sets to be looked at. Bad portion of it, you didn't nerf one of the most busted fucking sets in the game, which was Pirate Skeleton. This major protection and defile, the major defile can be purged off of you for whatever reason while retaining the protection, and the major protection is applying to shields. By not fixing that, which guess what, it's been tested, it has not been fixed, you don't fix one of the most prevalent exploits in Cyrodiil right now. Every fucking mother, or every person and their mother in Cyrodiil right now is wearing Pirate Skeleton if they have shields, because the whole core mechanic of shields is that they take true damage, so they have a lot of effective health. But Pirate Skeleton makes them take 30% less damage. So they're like gaining 30% shields for free. Why hasn't that been fixed? Other sets, you knew that resource management was impossible with this patch, so you nerfed Molag Kina. This resource drain, good. It's still shitty. This costs way too much for the amount of sustain that we have available to us. There should, I mean, I can't even sustain with a heavy attack build running cost reduction. Like, I still run out of stamina. Why the fuck would I ever run Molag Kina, honestly? So, I mean, you understand cause and effect to a degree, but you don't know the numbers on it yet. So, there's still a lot of work to be done. But I still mark that up as a positive change because you know that item sets need to be reevaluated as you change the game. Now, what about the other 500 sets that are a pile of fucking garbage? Are we going to reevaluate those too, or are we just going to leave some to rot? I mean, I know every item set in the game shouldn't be good. There should be progression, there should be stuff, but at the same time, there's a lot of really bad sets in this game, and it really hurts diversity to a point where it's like, oh, I have Burning Spellweave or Scathing Mage. Why would I ever run anything else? Or Julianos, like the 3 pinnacle of Magicka. And then Stamina has like Vicious Ophidian, Night Mother's Gaze, Hundings. Like, they have like a very small pool of sets because everything else is trash. So maybe start looking at some of these other sets. What else? Most of this is... Okay, so we're done with the base patch. Now let's look at the new item sets. I'm going to go over this briefly and talk about some of the good. War Maiden increases your magic abilities damage by 400 spell damage. It looks nice, but it's not, because this 400 spell damage will not be affected by percent amplifications like major sorcery or minor sorcery or class passives, because this applies to the tooltip directly, so that 400 spell damage does not have the opportunity to be buffed. Furthermore, no one in the game currently uses exclusively magic damage. Not even a hybrid build can. Caster builds either use lightning and fire, or lightning fire magic, or like DKs use fire and magic. So this isn't that good. It would have to be higher, it would have to be a proc that can be affected by other things, but yeah. A junk set, another useless set. Julianos gives me 300 spell damage to all abilities. So I'm going to gain way more DPS out of Julie than I'm going to gain on a War Maiden. So, War Maiden. Defiler. Probably one of your most questionable sets out of this. Another proc set. I mean, we just left the era of proc set, so to speak, but this looks like you're trying to bring it back. When you deal critical damage, you have an 8% chance to summon. It's kind of high, assuming like a stamina build is going to have like 80% crit and is going to have roughly 20 sources of damage ticking every second to half second. So 8% is pretty fucking high. So this is going to be going almost off cooldown, assuming that it works properly. To summon a hunger that spews poison to all enemies in front of you. How big? You should always state the efficiency of your stuff so that players can know. Is it 2 meters? Is it 7 meters? Is it 50 billion meters? We need context. We need information. If you're going to have something that has AoE, tell us what the AoE is. Because there's no system that I can measure anything and say, oh, this is 3 meters. Like, I don't have a tape measure in Elder Scrolls Online. Are you going to give me one so I can find out how big this is? So you need information, or you need a source of information or a tool that can allow us to find these things. That deals 9999 poison damage, so roughly 10,000. That's a big number, but proc sets can't crit, so I'm glad that you understand that to make proc sets semi-usable, that they have to have rather high tooltips now for us to use them, because they can't crit, and they will be affected by mitigation and so on, so this value will never truly be achieved. And stunning, enemies hit for 5 seconds. 5 seconds stun. What stun in the game currently lasts 5 seconds? Out of curiosity, how many stuns do we got in the game that last 5 seconds? The only one that comes to the top of my head is Gravity Crush, which is a synergy, so that means requiring teamwork from an ultimate, meaning it can only happen roughly every minute, but this can happen every 5. So let's assume that I'm really lucky and I'm just beating on a player, and God bless him, but he doesn't know how to CC break. He's going to be stunned for 5 seconds, and the second he gets up, it's going to happen again. Might want to look at that value. So Defiler, raising some red flags, deals a lot of damage, which is kind of good, kind of bad. It's AoE. How the fuck big is it? It has a relatively high proc chance, assuming we're using it in a stamina build, which many stamina builds have pretty high crit and a lot of sources of damage per second because dots and so on. And then a 5-second stun with a 5-second cooldown. Yeah. What the fuck? Alright. Next, Warrior Poet. Gain minor toughness at all times, increasing max health by 10%. Looks good on paper because you're like, ooh, what's minor toughness? Currently, the only thing in the game that lists that it gives minor toughness. Notice that I say lists. That kind of hints you that there might be something else. But the only thing that lists that it has minor toughness is Warden. So this seems really good, and it gives it to the user, so it's not a buff set. It would be much stronger for a tank if this applied to the group, like Eben. But the main issue with minor toughness is that Warhorn gives minor toughness. Wardens give minor toughness. So let's say I don't have a Warden in the group. I still have access to minor toughness from one of the strongest ultimates in the game in a group setting. In PvP and in PvP. Warhorn. Each morph gives minor toughness. It doesn't say it does, but it does. So this will not stack with Warhorn. So, garbage set, ultimately. Crafted sets. Assassin's Guile, Spell Crit, Weapon Crit, Spell Damage, Weapon Damage. Okay, so hybrid builds, or it doesn't matter what build you are, you can use this. Good job. You actually understood the importance that multiple different builds might want to utilize sets. So you tacked on another bonus, but if you have one, then you're not gaining the other. So you understand that. So good. And then increases the duration of your alchemical poisons by 4 seconds. Aren't cost reduction poisons still in this game? I mean, they did get nerfed to 30%, but man, all my abilities cost 5% more than they used to if I'm a stand build. Everyone lost cost reduction from CP and armor. Is this a good idea? I don't know. That's kind of scary, man. Daedric Trickery. While in combat, gain 1 of 5 random major buffs for 10 seconds every 20 seconds, so it has a 50% efficiency. Eligible buffs are Expedition, which is 30% movement speed, Protection, which is 30% damage reduction, Mending, which is 25% healing, Heroism, which is like 3 ultimate No. What is it? Is it 8 ultimate? It's some fucking absurdly high number. I don't even remember here. Let me hold on. Last Stand grants major heroism, granting 3 ultimate every 1.5 seconds for 10 seconds from this set. So let's check. Major heroism, 3 ultimate every 1.5 seconds, and Daedric Trickery lasts 10. Okay, and then vitality, increasing healing received by, I believe, is that 30%? Is it 20? Yeah, I believe it's 30%. So a lot of really strong buffs from Daedric Trickery. Like, I'm not sure what to say really about this, because you can't control what it's doing. But at the same time, in PvP, all of these are good no matter what. Expedition gives me move speed, allows me to line of sight, allows me to avoid damage. Protection makes me tankier than a motherfucker. Mending allows me to heal more than I can take damage. Heroism allows me to generate insane amounts of ultimate. And Vitality means I get healed even more. So, Daedric Trickery looking to be a very potent tank build in PvP. I would chalk this one up as questionable. I can't say it's good or bad. Shackle Breaker gives a bunch of weapon and spell, stamina and magic recovery. So hybrid build or being able to have multiple stats. Another really good PvP set. I'm sure a lot of you remember Trainee. The reason Trainee was so good was because it gave a lot of different stats. So Shackle Breaker looking to be a pretty decent PvP set because it plays into, even if you're a Magicka build, you need stamina. Even if you're a stamina build, you need Magicka in Cyrodiil. They all have their importance, so another decent PvP set. Would chalk that one up as good. Furthermore, it's crafted. Fucking thank you for making a decent crafted set for once. Battlegrounds Wizard Riposte. When you take critical damage, you apply minor maim, reducing their damage done by 15% for 15 seconds. Decent, I guess. The issue is minor maim is a pretty easily accessible buff in this game, or debuff. However, in PvP, as like a light armor build, it's not that big, and since it has no cooldown, it'll apply it to everyone, so your healer could run this and pretty much just reduce all damage of enemies by 15%, so decent. Night Slayer. This is the other really big what the fuck set. Max Magicka spell damage, health. I don't know what's going on with the 2 to 4 pieces, but 5 piece. Your fully charged heavy attacks against players deal an additional 10% of their max health as Oblivion damage. Now, you probably are saying, what the fuck is Oblivion damage? Oblivion damage is the rarest source of damage in this game because it's unresistible. It ignores mitigation, it ignores damage shields, it ignores CP. It does true damage. It's really, really strong. So dealing 10% of their max health is Oblivion damage. So that means ignoring the damage from the heavy attack itself, any proc sets, any other things, you need 10 heavy attacks to kill a player, assuming they don't heal. Now, on paper, doesn't seem that like that's that big of a deal. Issue that comes with this. In Cyrodiil, I can have 10 people all do this, charge up a heavy attack, launch it from stealth, and instantly nuke someone. Now, you can pretty much do the same thing with other gank builds, but this doesn't care if you're a tank, a healer, or DPS. It will guarantee death no matter what. Furthermore, since we are dealing with damage with our heavy attacks, there will be other proc sets. This raises a really big red flag. This is going to allow Zergs to just tear through people by doing nothing but heavy attacking them. That is not gameplay you want in this game. There's enough stupid bullshit that requires zero skill in Cyrodiil that plays into the favor of Zergs, that adding more hurts so much. Please, please reduce this value. Please. Coward's Gear. When sprinting, you gain permanent major expedition and protection, reducing damage taken by 30%, increasing movement speed by 30%. Okay, interesting set. Doesn't seem awful. Doesn't seem OP. It just allows you to be very, very mobile and take really less damage. So really good with gank builds probably that are trying to do more than just do high burst. They're trying to be like guerrilla warfare. Go and deal damage, come out. Go and deal damage, come out. So decent set, interesting. Not sure how it'll be applied. Probably be decent in some BG application. Vanguard's challenge: when you taunt an enemy player, they deal 50% less damage to all other players, but 100% more to you for 15 seconds. Really interesting, because a lot of players have been wanting a taunt in Cyrodiil for a long time. So we kind of did that. It's not the same thing as a taunt, but it's still something. I really like it, but again, raises a red flag. What's going to stop a large group of players from applying this to a smaller group's damage dealer on a few tanks, and then just make it so that that small man can't kill the healers because they're taking 50% less damage? So I'm really worried. The implications with this set raise a lot of red flags. Impregnable armor gives a bunch of fucking crit resist. This is roughly 5% damage reduction. Or 25% damage reduction from critical resistance. Apologies. Every 100 resistance and crit is 1% damage reduction, if I recall correctly. Furthermore, there is no cap on the amount of critical resistance you can gain. However, there is a system in place where you cannot make an enemy deal less damage than their basic attack. So the way crits work, as a baseline, you get 50% bonus damage, or a 150% multiplier. The 100% comes from base damage. So what you would have done if you hadn't crit, the 50% refers to the bonus damage of the crit. So adding, so let's say I have 1.5% crit hit damage, and I'm attacking an enemy with 6,000 crit resist. That means they take 60% less damage from crit. That goes into my crit modifier, which is 1.5, which will be subtracted by 0.6. Now, since that goes under my 100%, that extra 100 crit, or whatever crit resist, is useless. So I would still deal damage as if I had not crit at all, but I will not lose damage. So there is no crit resistance other than whatever your enemy would have been brought to the baseline of not critting in the first place. I know that was kind of hard to follow, but there is no crit resist cap. But however, you cannot make someone deal less damage than they would have dealt if they hadn't crit. It's probably not getting any easier to understand. Don't worry about it. There is no crit resist cap, but it doesn't mean it's always going to be good. Trial sets. Inventor's Guard. When you use an ultimate ability, you and two closest allies in a 28 meters range gain major Aegis, reducing damage taken from dungeon and trial monsters by 50% for 10 seconds. Interesting. Don't like that it's the near two allies. I mean, that's cool because it incentivizes situational awareness. Alright, my squishiest DPS, come in, I'm casting an ultimate, get your tankiness. Issue is, in a trial there is 12 people. Why are we using small caps of 2? Not a big fan of this, not at all. Master Architect does the same thing but gives Major Slayer. Same idea. I like that it requires situational awareness. I don't like that it's two nearest allies. In a 4-man dungeon, okay, whatever, that's cool. In a 12-man, that's stupid. I have 12 people. Why am I affecting 1/6 of my group? That's shit. War Machine, same thing, but it's medium armor. So pretty much everyone in the raid does the same shit. The same issues come up. It only affects 2 people, but it allows everyone to have options. So if you want a tank to do it, he gives Major Aegis. If you want a healer to do it, she gives Major Aegis. If you want your light armor build to do it, he gives Major Slayer. If you want your stand build to do it, she gives Major Slayer. Whatever. But it's 2 allies. It should be at least 4. Or 3. Because if it's you and 2, that means it affects 3. So in a 4-man group, that's great. But it should be 3 allies. That way, at least 4-man groups can make use out of this, and I don't have to have 6 fucking people in this gear set, or 4 people in this gear set, to make sure my entire raid gets it. Furthermore, is there a system in place where it'll give it to the nearest ally no matter what? So if I'm standing here, and my healer is standing here, and then I have another person here, and I cast an ultimate. These 2 get Major Slayer, okay? Now another person comes in, and I cast another ultimate, but they still have Major Slayer. does it refresh on them because they're closer to me? Or does it give it to the person who doesn't have it? So how does this set work? If it works like it gives it to the people who don't have it, then if you gave it to 3 nearby allies, we'd be at a decent place where it's like, okay, I can understand wearing this. But if it just refreshes to the nearest people, it's shit. Alright, so that covers pretty much all of the good and bad. I know it wasn't probably as big. There was a lot of discussion, though, so, I mean, there's a lot of information. Next, we are going to... So that covers everything that we talked about in the PTS patch notes in a more positive light. Now, I didn't talk about every fucking little thing in the game because you guys would be here for eons. You'd be like, why is he still talking? But in the next video, we are going to talk about cause and effect. Things that these changes bring into the game. They could be bad, they could be good, but the more hidden stuff, this cause or this change happens because of this minor thing. If you've ever heard of the butterfly effect, where one small thing can affect the world, well, the same idea applies to these changes. A lot of these things bring with them implications that will affect greater systems that seem to not be looked at. So I really want to talk about a lot in that. So it's going to be it's going to be heavier subject. It's going to be a lot to talk about. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. I'm going to try and put timestamps on my stuff from now on because I know it's kind of grueling to deal and listen to me ranting about a bunch of bullshit that you might not find interesting. So I'm going to try and put in some timestamps and look into that. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed at least somewhat of this. And I look forward to talking to you guys again in the final video. But stay strong. Stay clear, stay positive, and let's try and do something with this. Remember, if we keep talking to the devs and we keep letting them know that we're unhappy, they're at least going to go into the future knowing that they need change. And that's what we need right now. These changes that they've forced on us, we don't want. But we have to talk about why we don't want them, why they're bad for everyone instead of just being a selfish, ugh, I don't want change. It needs to be like, well, because these changes are bad for the game. We need to present it in a good manner. But again, thank you so much for sticking around with me, but I'll see you until next time.